If Candlemas Day be fair and bright, winter will have another fight. If Candlemas Day brings clouds and rain, winter is gone and will not come again. They said the rhyme every February in the high country above the West Allen, and every February they believed exactly as much of it as suited them. The shepherds believed the half that gave them something to complain about. The vicar believed neither half, and preached on it regardless. Frances Hale had come to read it in a way no almanac had ever printed. A bright Candlemas meant a hard road, and a hard road meant that a man with a bond in his coat could bring a horse up the bank from Whitfield without breaking its knees and be standing at her door by noon, hat in hand, mouthful of sorrow he did not feel. Rain kept such men at home. Frances had learned to pray for rain. On the morning this story begins, there was neither rain nor brightness. There was cold, the reasonable and unhurried cold of the last week of November, which does not argue and does not relent. The water in the ewer had frozen to a lid of grey glass. She broke it with the heel of her hand, the way she broke it every morning, and washed in what lay beneath, and did not permit herself to feel it. Ninefield stood where a sensible man would not have built. Her grandfather had built it. He had come up out of the lead trade with money in his hands and a wish to be seen from the valley, and so he set his house on the shoulder of the fell, with its back to the north, and its long windows facing the weather like a man facing a fight he expected to win. He had won for 30 years. His son had lost in 9. The house had 14 rooms, and Frances kept 6 of them alive. The rest she had closed one by one over 2 winters, drawing the shutters, laying the dust sheets, turning the keys, and each time she turned a key she felt something in the house lie down and not get up again. She carried the coal herself. There had been a girl from Carshield until the spring, and before that 2, and before that a household. Now there was Mrs. Part, who came up 3 days in the week from the village because she had known Frances as a child and could not be persuaded to stop, and who took her wages in eggs and in the fiction that she was paid. Bess was 6 years old and slept curled like a fern frond in the small bed by the chimney breast, where the stones held the last of the kitchen fire until nearly dawn. Frances woke her by warming her feet through the blanket. That was the only kindness the morning had to offer, and she gave it freely. Toby was already up. Toby was 12 and had not slept past first light since the day their father died. He was at the kitchen table with a slate and a stub of chalk and the jackdaw on his shoulder, and both of them looked up with the same tilt of the head. The boy grey-eyed and the bird grey-headed, and Frances thought, as she often thought, that nobody who had not lived with a jackdaw could be told what it was like. The bird was called Solomon for his wisdom, which was nil, and for his fondness for treasure, which was total. He had come out of a chimney at 3 weeks old with his eyes still blue, and had never afterwards accepted that he was a bird. He rode on Toby. He shouted at the dog. He stole anything that caught the light, and carried it up under the loose slate above the dairy, where over 2 years he had assembled a hoard consisting of 1 thimble, 7 buttons, the brass end of a bootlace, a shilling that Frances had wanted very badly at the time, and other articles which the family had learnt not to look for and simply to replace. Upstairs, in the room that had been the best bedchamber and was now the only bedchamber that mattered, Frances's grandmother lay with her hip mending badly and her mind not mending at all, in the sense that it had never been broken and never would be. Dorcas Hale was 79. She had fallen on the back stairs in August, and the bone had knitted crooked, and she would not walk again beyond the length of a room on 2 sticks, and she said so herself without softening it, because she had never in her life softened anything. Frances brought her tea and set her up on the pillows and combed her hair, which was long and white, and still her chief vanity. You have been at the ledger again. I have been at the coal. You have ink on the side of your hand. You always did press too hard. Frances looked at the smudge and did not deny it. The old woman took her wrist and turned it, and studied the chilblains along the knuckles the way a farrier studies a hoof. £420. Grandmother, I am deaf in one ear and old in the whole of me, and I can still count. £420 at 5 in the 100 and the term day at Candlemas. Do not manage me, Frances. I have been managed by better. There was nothing to be done with her, so Frances told her the truth, which was that the sum was £427 and some shillings, that the interest had been paid in September out of the sale of the 2 heifers, that there was nothing left to sell that would fetch enough to matter, and that Mr. Josiah Ferring of Whitfield, who held the bond, had written a letter in October to say that he could not carry the debt beyond the coming term. Ferring, Dorcas turned her head and looked at the window, where the fell went up grey into greyer cloud. His father carried coal for your grandfather. That is not a thing I can put in the ledger. No, but you might put it in your face when you look at him. The story of how Ninefields came to owe £427 was not a story of vice, which is what people generally hope for. Edmund Hale had not gambled, and had not drunk, and had kept no woman in Newcastle. He had believed in a vein of lead. He had believed in it the way other men believe in a religion, patiently and at cost. And he had spent 9 years and every free shilling proving a level into the hillside above the Sipton burn, and in the January 2 years past he had stood for 11 hours in water to the thigh setting a prop, and had come home wet and cheerful, with a piece of ore in his pocket that assayed better than anything the district had seen in a decade, and had gone into a fever on the Thursday and died on the Sunday. They had buried him in the churchyard at Ninebanks. The piece of ore was still on the parlour mantel. Frances had never been able to decide whether it was a relic or an accusation, and so she dusted it and left it there. What he left besides was the debt, and 3 of the 4 notebooks in which he had recorded 9 years of levels and bearings and assays in a hand so small and so orderly that it looked like lace, and 2 children by his second wife who had died of Bess, and his own mother with her hip not yet broken, and a daughter of 26 who had kept his accounts since she was 17, and knew to a farthing what he had done and had. Never once told him to stop. She was 28 now. That was the other sum in the ledger, and she was aware of it in the way one is aware of the weather. She had been handsome enough at 20, not a beauty, and not the sort of girl who is discussed at an assembly, but a tall, clear-faced girl with her father's grey eyes, and a way of listening that older men found agreeable, and younger men found unnerving. There had been an understanding once with a curate named Lawson, who had gone to a living in Cheshire, and who had written a very honest letter explaining that he could not undertake the maintenance of a mother-in-law and 2 infants on £110 a year, and who had been quite right, and whom she had forgiven within a month, and had thought of perhaps twice since. After that the district had made up its mind about her. It did so kindly, which was worse. She was Miss Hale of Ninefields, who was so very good with the little ones, who was such a comfort to the old lady, who managed everything, who was to be admired, who was not to be married. She heard the sentence in every drawing-room from Allendale to Haydon Bridge, and she had stopped resenting it at about the time she stopped growing. What she had not stopped doing was working. That was the thing the district never quite saw, because it did not look like work in the shape they knew. She kept the books of the Ninefields farm and of 2 farms besides, for the Hetheringtons at Monk and for the widow Charlton, at £1 a quarter each. She wrote letters for people who could not. She taught Toby Latin out of her father's Caesar, and taught Bess her letters out of a Bible with the family births in the front, and she had taught herself over 9 years at her father's elbow to read a mind plan the way other women read a piece of music. That last was the thing that mattered, though nobody knew it yet, including her. On the 2nd of December a paper came up from Allendale town with the notice printed in it, and Mrs. Part brought it because Mrs. Part brought everything. The Duke of Wentbridge had come north to Aldercar. He had not been north in 4 years. Aldercar sat 12 miles east on the sheltered side of the moor, a low grey house of great age, with a wall round it and a wood behind it, and it had been kept by servants and visited by agents, and had not had a Carrow sleeping in it since the war ended. Now the Duke was at Aldercar with his household, and the notice said further that the ducal mineral agents would receive applications at Aldercar on the 11th of the month respecting the reopening of the Sipton and Whitewall's workings, and that leases of the old grounds would be considered upon terms. Frances read it standing in the kitchen with her hand flat on the table. The Sipton workings were her father's level. Not his ground. He had never owned an inch of it. He had held it on a bargain from the Wentbridge estate, the old kind of bargain. A duty of the ore raised, and a term of years. And the term had lapsed in the confusion after his death, because the agent at the time had died too, and the whole hillside had gone back to bracken and rust. And Ninefields, the house, the 11 fields it was named for, the whole of it, stood on land that had been bought out outright from the Wentbridge estate by her grandfather in a year when the family had needed money. That much was hers. The lead under the fell was not. You have a look on you. Mrs. Peart had come to the scullery door with her hands in a cloth. I am going to Aldercar on the 11th. You are never. I have the only survey of that ground that exists. My father made it. 4 notebooks. They will send some man up from Alston who has never walked it, and he will tell them to drive a new cross cut through the sandstone at a cost of I do not know what, and the ore is not there, it is west of the fault, and my father proved it and wrote it down. Mrs. Peart wiped her hands slowly. And what do you want off them for it? Frances had not known the answer until it came out of her mouth, and when it came out, she heard how much she wanted it. The lease. In my own name. The 11th was a Wednesday, and it came in clear and bitter. She was up at 5. She wore the grey merino, which had been turned once and would not survive being turned again, and her mother's garnet cross, and she put the 4 notebooks in a satchel of her father's with a strap that still smelled of him, and she walked the first 3 miles to the turnpike and took the carrier's cart the rest of the way, sitting up beside a crate of geese with her feet going numb in a slow and orderly fashion from the toes inward. Aldercar appeared out of the wood at 9:30. It was not a castle, and did not pretend to be. It was long and low and grey, and had grown by pieces over 4 centuries, and there were rooks in the beeches behind it in such numbers that the noise came out to meet her on the drive like a second wind. She gave her name at the door, and was shown to a stone passage where 9 or 10 men sat on a bench with their hats on their knees, and she understood at once that she had made an error, because they all stood up when she came in, and then none of them knew what to do with her afterwards. She sat down at the end of the bench with the satchel on her lap, and waited 3 hours and a quarter. The men went in one at a time, and came out again looking either pleased or careful. A little before 1 o'clock a footman came for her, and she followed him up a stair and along a corridor hung with dark pictures of dogs, and he put her through a door into a room with a fire in it, and said that the gentleman would be with her directly, and shut the door behind her. It was not the room she had expected. It was somebody's morning room, with worked cushions and a workbox and a bowl of forced hyacinths that filled the whole air with a smell of spring so out of season that it made her feel unwell. There was a second door at the far end, standing a hand's breadth open, and beyond it voices. She could have coughed. She thought of it afterwards a great many times, that she could simply have coughed. The first voice was a woman's, high and even, the voice of a person who has never in her life had to make herself heard. Then you will call at Whitfield Park, and you will call on the Ridleys, and you will endure the Prideaux dinner on the 20th, and after that you may bury yourself for the rest of the winter, and I shall not say one word. You will say a great many words. The second voice was low and unhurried, and had something wrong with it. Some weariness laid across it like a hand across a bell. Sabine Prideaux is 24, and has £11,000 and a very tolerable understanding. You have described a horse. I have described what is available. Adam, you are 35. You have a brother who does not leave the house, and an aunt who does not leave you alone, and one of those two circumstances is going to change this winter, and I know which one I am betting on. There was a pause and the sound of a paper turned. A third voice came in then, a North Country voice smoothed at the edges the way a man smooths himself for the room he is standing in, and Frances knew it before she had heard 6 words of it, because she had been hearing it in her sleep since October. There is one other name on the list your ladyship might strike. Miss Hale of Ninefields is on it, and she is a gentleman's daughter, but the family is not what it was. Hale, the woman again. Hale, that is the one who is coming today about the lead. That is the one. Well, what is she? She should have coughed. She stood in the middle of the worked cushions and the hyacinths with the satchel strap cutting into her shoulder, and did not. She is 28, my lady. The father died 2 winters since, and left nothing but the house and the debt on it, which I hold myself, and which I shall have to call at the term, though I take no pleasure in it. There is an old woman bedfast upstairs with a broken hip. There are 2 young children by the second wife, boy of 12 and a girl of 6. She has no portion, she has no connection worth the naming, and she has the whole of it on her back. Good heavens, she is a very worthy young woman. Ferring gave the words the tone of a man laying a wreath. And then the low voice, flat, incurious. The voice of a man closing a ledger of his own. No man alive would take her on. It was not said cruelly. That was the thing she came back to, later in the dark turning it over. If it had been said cruelly, she could have hated it cleanly and been done. It was said the way a man says that a bridge will not bear a wagon. As a fact about the world, established, unremarkable, not requiring any particular feeling. Somebody laughed, and it was Ferring, and it was the laugh of a man agreeing with his betters. Frances crossed the room and pushed the door open with the flat of her hand. There were 4 of them. A grey-haired lady in black by the window with a list in her lap. A thin clerk at the table with the ink, Ferring in his good coat, standing, hat under his arm, and his face going through 3 distinct expressions in about a second and a half, of which only the last was intended for anybody to see. And by the fire, half-seated on the arm of a chair, with his boots crossed at the ankle, a big dark man of 35, with a long jaw and a cold clear eye, holding a paper he was not reading. I am Miss Hale. She did not set the satchel down. I've been waiting since 10 o'clock and the door was open. I did not mean to hear it, and I did hear it, and I will not pretend otherwise, because the pretending would be a worse insult to me than the saying. Nobody moved. She had never in her life spoken so to anybody. Her ears were roaring. She heard her own voice going on perfectly steadily from somewhere just behind her own left shoulder. I have come about the Sipton ground. If your grace would rather I came another day, I will come another day. I have walked and carried since 5 this morning, and I will do it again, and it will cost me nothing but a day. But I would rather do my business now. The Duke of Wentbridge got up off the arm of the chair. She had expected, in the half-second she had allowed herself to expect anything, that he would apologise. Men of that kind apologised beautifully. It was a thing they were taught, along with the shooting and the Latin, and it cost them about as much. He did not apologise. He looked at her for what felt like a very long time, and something went across his face that she could not read at all and did not like, because it was not shame and it was not amusement, and those were the only 2 things she had prepared for. Sit down, Miss Hale. I would rather stand. Then I shall stand as well, and my aunt will be very uncomfortable. And Mr. Ferring will be obliged to stand, and none of us will get on. Sit down. She sat. He sat. The grey lady by the window put her list face down on her knee with the air of a woman who has decided to watch. What is in the bag? Frances opened the satchel and set the 4 notebooks on the table in a row. My father's survey of the Sipton and Whitewall's grounds. 9 years of it. Levels, bearings, water, assays. Every foot of that hillside is in these books, and there is not another copy in the world. The thin clerk reached for one, and she put 2 fingers on it. Not yet. The clerk withdrew his hand and looked at his master. Your agents will begin at the old shaft head, because that is where the ruins are, and ruins look like evidence. They will drive east, and they will spend a great deal of money in the sandstone, and they will find nothing at all, and in 2 years your grace will be told that the Allen grounds are worked out and are not worth a further shilling, and that will not be true. The ore is west of the fault. My father found the fault in the spring 9 years ago, and he drove the level to prove it, and he was standing in the water proving it in the January he died. He was right. There is a piece of the ore on my parlour mantel, and it assays at 60 and 8. The room was very quiet. Somewhere behind the house the rooks were arguing. 60 and 8. The Duke turned the words over once, quietly, as though weighing them. You may have it assayed yourself. I would rather you did. And what do you want, Miss Hale? The lease of the Sipton ground on the old bargain. 21 years. A 5th part of the ore raised to the estate, which is a better duty than my father paid, and I know what my father paid because I wrote the receipts. I will take the risk, I will find the money, I will hire the men, and if there is nothing there, I will have ruined myself and not your grace. She put her hand flat on the topmost notebook. And I will want it in my own name. Not in a trustee's, not in my brother's when he comes of age. Mine, Lady Cressida Vane, made a small sound. You are aware that you are asking me to grant a mining lease to a woman. I am aware that I am the only person in this county who knows where the ore is, and that I am a woman, and I have not found a way to separate the two. He did not grant it that day. She had not expected him to, and would have thought less of him if he had. What he did was take the topmost notebook, open it at random, and go still. Frances knew that stillness. She had seen it in her father 100 times. Over a plan or a piece of stone, the particular quiet of a man whose whole attention has gone down through a page into the ground beneath it. She had not expected to see it in a duke, and it disarranged her considerably. This is a good hand. He did not look up from the page. Whose is the red ink? Mine, he surveyed. I plotted. Then this is your hand as much as his. It is his ground and his 9 years. The red is only tidiness. He turned 3 more pages and closed the book, and set it down with a care that she noticed and put away to think about later. I will have the ore assayed. I will send a man for it, and you will not give it to Mr. Ferring. You will give it to nobody but the man I send, and he will bring you a receipt for it in my hand. I will want the 4 books read to me by somebody who understands them. I do not propose to take them out of your keeping, so you will have to come and do it here. How often? Twice in the week until it is done. There is a carriage. It goes to Ninebanks on the Tuesday for the post, and it can go by the Sipton Road on the Tuesday and the Friday, and it will cost the estate nothing but the horse's patience. He looked up. You will be paid for it. 2 guineas the week. It was too much, and they both knew it. She felt the offer come towards her with charity concealed in it the way a pill is concealed in jam, and she felt her whole back go straight. 1 guinea. 2. My clerk has 3 and cannot read a mine plan. Then pay your clerk less. Lady Cressida laughed out loud, one short unwilling bark, and put her hand over her mouth. There was a silence, and in it Frances understood that she had won something and lost something, and could not tell which was the larger. 1 guinea and a half. He let out a breath through his nose. And that is my final insult. Mr. Ferring, you will oblige me by waiting in the hall. Ferring went. He went slowly and with dignity, and he looked at Frances on the way past, and his look said several things at once, and the chief of them was that he had been made to leave a room in front of her, and would remember it. When the door shut, the Duke stood with his back to the fire, and his hands behind him. I am told that Mr. Ferring holds a bond of yours falling due at Candlemas. You were told correctly. You were in the room. 420. 427 pounds, 11 shillings and 4pence, and the interest to the term. I can take up that bond this afternoon. There it was. She had known it was coming from the moment the door shut on Ferring, and she had spent the interval deciding. And the deciding had been easier than she anticipated. You can, you will not. Miss Hale. Your Grace said a thing in that room. It was not a kind thing, but I have been considering it for a quarter of an hour, and I find I cannot call it an untrue one. Her voice did something on the last word, and she stopped and made it behave and went on. There is no man alive who would take me on. I have known that for 6 years. What I object to is being taken up. I am not a subscription. If you pay that bond this afternoon, then every soul between here and Hexham will know by Sunday that the Duke of Wentbridge said a cruel thing about the Hale woman, and then salved himself with £400, and I shall be the Hale woman who was salved, for the rest of my life, and my brother will be the boy who was salved, and he will grow up knowing it. Leave me the debt. Give me the lease. I will pay the debt myself out of the ore, or I will lose the house and go into a school as a teacher of arithmetic, which I am fit for, and either way it will be mine. He was quiet a long moment. That is a great deal of pride for a woman with no coal in her cellar. It is all that is left in the cellar, and I am burning it slowly. The carriage took her home. She had not asked for the carriage, and could not refuse it without childishness, so she sat in it with the satchel on her knees, and the 4 books safe inside, and watched the moor go by, going blue in the early dark, and she did not cry. Because she had a rule about that, and because the coachman would have seen her face when he handed her down. Toby was on the wall by the gate with Solomon hunched on the gatepost beside him, both of them furious with cold, and neither of them willing to go in first. Well, Toby did not get down off the wall. He did not say yes. Did he say no? She thought about it, standing in the road with the carriage lamps going away down the hill, and the whole bulk of the fell above her, black now, holding its lead. No. Frances found that she was almost smiling. He did not say no either. She went twice in the week, on the Tuesday and the Friday, through December. They worked in the estate room at Aldercar, which had a stone floor and a table 9 feet long, and 100 years of plans in a press against the wall, and which was the only room in the house that Frances ever came to feel easy in. There was a fire that the Duke built up himself, badly, and there was a great deal of paper, and after the first day there was no clerk, because the clerk had been sent to Newcastle and had somehow not come back. She read the notebooks aloud, and he asked questions. That was the whole of it, and it was not like anything else in her life. He asked good questions. That was what undid her, slowly, over 5 weeks, more thoroughly than any amount of gallantry could have done. He did not know the ground, and he said so on the first morning plainly, without the little laugh that men use to make ignorance charming, and then he set about not being ignorant of it. He wanted to know why water ran east in one level and west in the next. He wanted to know what a bing was, and what a bouse team was, and why her father had spent 2 years on a crosscut that yielded nothing, and when she explained that it had yielded the knowledge that the vein was not there, which was worth 2 years, he sat back and looked at the ceiling and said that he wished the ordnance had understood as much in Spain. He said very little about Spain. She noticed the size of the silence around it, and did not walk into it. On the 3rd Friday she came early, because the carrier had been early, and the estate room was empty, and she went along the passage looking for somebody, and heard a piano. It was being played badly, and with great violence, and then it stopped, and a voice she did not know spoke with a bitterness so raw and so young that she stopped in the passage as if she had walked into a wall. "No, no, take it away. Take the whole thing away. I am not a child to be sat down at a keyboard." She should have gone back. Instead she came to the doorway of a small square room with a south window, and she saw a young man of about 26 sitting at a piano with his hands in his lap, and a manservant standing helplessly by, and she saw the scarring that came up out of the young man's collar along the left side of his jaw, and she saw that his eyes were open and grey and quite beautiful, and were looking at nothing whatever. He turned his head at once. Blind men always know when the light in a doorway changes. Who is that? Frances Hale. I read your brother's mind books to him on Tuesdays and Fridays. I am early and I am lost, and I have been standing here listening to you, and I am sorry for it, and I would be sorrier if you had been playing well. There was an appalled pause. The manservant went the colour of a beetroot. Then Christopher Carrow put his head back and laughed, and it was clearly a thing he had not done for some while, because it came out rusty and surprised him more than it surprised her. "Say that again." "You were playing very badly." "I was playing very badly." He turned his face back towards the keys, for the excellent reason that I have not learnt to play without seeing my hands, and I would rather be thought idle than be seen learning. Sit down, Miss Hale, who is lost. Nobody in this house has told me anything true since June. After that she came a half-hour early on purpose, and nobody ever mentioned it. Kit Carrow had been a lieutenant of the 52nd, and had gone up a ladder at Badajoz in the dark, and had come down again 4 years ago with the sight gone out of both eyes, and 2 fingers gone from his left hand, and a temper that his family handled like something hot from the fire. He had been at Aldercar ever since. The county had called twice in the first year, and then stopped, and he knew precisely why they had stopped, and he had a way of saying so that made people leave. Frances did not leave. She had spent 2 years in a house with an old woman who could not get out of bed, and a small girl who did not remember her mother, and she had learned that pity is a thing you do to somebody, and company is a thing you do with them. She read him the newspaper and argued with the leading articles. She described the weather in more detail than any sighted person wants the weather described, because she found that he wanted it, the exact colour of the cloud over the Whitfield road, whether the rooks were up or sitting. She told him about Ninefields, the accounts and the closed rooms, and Bess losing her boot in the moss, and Mrs. Part's opinions on the vicar. In the 2nd week of January she brought Toby, and Toby brought Solomon in a covered basket, having been told twice not to. The jackdaw came out of the basket into the small square room like a scandal. He went up onto the curtain rail and shouted. He came down and walked the length of the piano with his head on one side and struck 3 notes with his feet, and Kit Carrow sat very still with his ruined hand half raised and his face doing something complicated. "What is it?" "A jackdaw." Toby used the tone of a boy explaining that water is wet. "He is called Solomon. He is not tame, he only lives with us. Will he come to a hand? He will come to anything he thinks might be silver." Kit put out his left hand, the one he kept in his pocket in company, the one with the 2 fingers gone. Frances watched him do it, and understood that he had done it, because there was nobody in the room to look at it. The bird considered the hand, walked up the sleeve, and put its beak into the corner of his mouth to see whether he had been eating anything. She had to go and stand at the window for a moment. That was the afternoon she turned round and found the Duke of Wentbridge in the doorway, and he was not looking at his brother. He was looking at her, and the look had been going on for some time before she caught it. He went away again without coming in. She heard his boots down the stone passage, and then the door of the estate room, and when she came in 20 minutes later he was standing at the long table with his back to her, and the fire built up wrong again, smoking. He has not asked for a person twice in 4 years. He is asking for the bird. He is asking for the bird. He shifted a plan an inch to the left, which did not need doing. Miss Hale, when your curate would not have you, did you hate him? It was so entirely unlike anything he had asked her that she answered before she considered. For about a month. Then it went. He was honest, and he was poor, and he was 23, and I would not have wanted a man who married me and regretted it in the 5th year. That is very reasonable. It is not reasonable at all. It only sounds so because 6 years have gone over it. He was quiet for a while. There was a woman. He stayed where he was at the table with his back to her, and it was some while before the rest of it came. Before, everything was drawn, and the settlement was with the lawyers. And then they brought Kit home in the September, and she came to Aldercar and saw him. And she was in the house 4 days. On the 4th day, she told me that she could not undertake it. Those were the words. She could not undertake it. She was not a monster. She was 22, and she had been shown the whole of her life in an afternoon, and she did not want it, and I have thought since that she was braver to say it than half the women in England would have been. He put his hand flat on the plan. But I have not been able to hear a settlement spoken of since, without a taste in my mouth. Frances stood in the middle of the estate room with her hands cold and her face hot, and so when your aunt reads you a list of women. She had to stop and begin again. And Mr. Ferring says that there is a Miss Hale with an old woman and 2 children and a debt on her back. Yes, you were not saying it about me at all. I was saying it about myself, at the top of my voice, in front of a stranger, in my aunt's morning room. He turned round then, which does not make it a smaller thing to have said. It makes it a meaner one. I have been trying for 5 weeks to find a way to tell you so that did not sound like a man asking to be forgiven, and I have not found one, and I am too tired to keep looking. So there it is, and you may do as you like with it. The fire cracked. Somewhere off in the house Kit was playing something badly and slowly and not stopping. Build the fire from the back, and stop putting the small coal on top. It is smoking because it cannot breathe. Everything is. She went home in the dark that night with her chest hurting, and did not sleep, and at 3 in the morning she got up and lit a candle and looked at the thing squarely. The way she looked at the ledger, because she had never in her life found that looking away made a sum smaller. The sum was this. She was 28, and she had a debt falling due in 3 weeks, and a bedfast grandmother, and 2 children and 11 poor fields, and she had gone and formed an attachment to a duke. Not to his rank, which she found merely inconvenient, to the man who built a fire badly and asked what a Baustine was, and let his brother be laughed at by a boy of 12, because it was better than being pitied by the county. She blew the candle out and lay in the dark, and said out loud to the ceiling, quite calmly, that it would pass, in the tone of a woman telling a lie to somebody she respected. Mr. Josiah Ferring came up to Ninefields on the 20th of January, on a good horse in a hard frost. He was shown into the parlour, which had a fire in it for the first time since Christmas, and he stood with his back to it, warming himself in her house, and he took a long look at the piece of ore on the mantel. He was not an ugly man. He was 50, spare and neat, and there was nothing in his face to fasten on, and he had lent money in that valley for 25 years and had never once been unpleasant to anybody about it, which was how he had come to own so much of it. I will not go about the matter. He did not sit down. The bond falls at Candlemas, and I cannot carry it, and I do not care to sit in the church and see this house sold over your family. There is one way round it that is decent. Say it. Marry me. Frances looked at the window. I am 50, and I bury nobody's illusions, Miss Hale. There is no romance in it, but I am comfortable. And you would be mistress of a good house at Whitfield with 3 servants, and never break ice in a ewer again as long as you live, and the bond would go into the fire on the day. And my family. He had the sums ready. He had come with them written out, and that was the thing she remembered afterwards, that he had written them out. The boy is 12 and clever, and there is no future for him here. I would put him to the Newcastle counting house of a friend, board and all found, and he would thank me at 30. The little girl would go to my sister at Carlisle, who is childless and would make much of her, and would be a great deal warmer than she is now. Your grandmother is 79 and requires a nurse, and there is a very respectable place at Hexham, where the old people are decently kept, and I would pay the whole charge of it, and you might drive over as often as you pleased. The fire in the parlour ticked. Overhead, very faintly, Frances could hear her grandmother's stick going twice against the floor, which meant nothing in particular, which meant only that she was awake and wanted the sound of somebody moving in the house. You have thought of everything, Miss Ferring. I have thought of what is practical. You have carried this 4 years, and you are not made of iron, whatever the valley says. No, Frances kept her eyes on the window. I am not made of iron. Take your horse home. He put his hat on. I will not ask twice. You have not asked once. You have offered to buy the roof over 3 people's heads and take the 3 people out from under it, and you have called it decency, and you did the sums in a fair round hand before you set out. Go home, Miss Ferring. He stopped at the door. Candlemas. He had the latch already in his hand. The 2nd of February, at noon, at the King's Head in Allendale. Bring £427.11 and 4pence and the interest, or bring the keys. Lady Cressida Vane came on the Friday, and she did not come to the estate room. She was waiting in the hall at Aldercar, in her bonnet with her gloves on, which is a way of telling a person that they are not going any further. Walk with me to the beech avenue. It is perishing, and we shall both be honest sooner. They walked. The rooks came off the trees in a black rag and settled again. You are not a fool, so I shall not talk to you as though you were. Do you know what is being said in this valley? I imagine I do. Then you imagine wrong. Because it is worse. It is being said that my nephew insulted a poor gentlewoman in my morning-room in the hearing of Josiah Ferring, and that he has been driving her to and fro in his own carriage twice a week ever since, and that she has been very clever, and that she will have her £400 paid at Candlemas and the lease of a mine besides, and that a duke may be brought to anything if he is made ashamed of himself in front of the right people. Lady Cressida walked on 4 paces. Mr. Ferring has been particularly full of it since Tuesday. I have never asked him for the bond. I refused it to his face. I believe you. It will not signify in the smallest degree. My dear girl, I am not your enemy. If it were merely my own opinion, I should tell you that you are worth 6 of Sabine Prideaux, and that you would run that estate better than any of us, and I mean that, and it is perfectly useless. He is going to marry money this year, or he is going to sell the Durham property. And if he sells the Durham property, there is no provision for his brother when he dies. And Kit will be a blind man of 40 living on the charity of whoever inherits. He knows it. He has known it since the war ended. She stopped and turned. The Prideaux are at Aldercar on the 30th. The thing is as good as settled, and it will be spoken of at the Candlemas audit, because half the county comes to the audit, and it is the cheapest way of publishing anything. You are a woman who reads a ledger. Read this one. The beeches went up grey and bare, and the rooks shouted. Thank you for telling me. Frances got that much out, and no more. You are not going to weep, are you? No. No. Something in Lady Cressida's face gave way for a moment, and was put back. No. That is precisely the trouble with you. Frances went into the estate room and put the 4 notebooks on the long table in a row, the way she had put them there on the 11th of December, and when the Duke came in she was standing behind them with her bonnet still on. There is nothing left in them that you need me for. The plans are copied fair, and your man at Alston has the assay, and he will tell you the same thing my father told you 9 years ago, which is that the ore is west of the fault. Take the books. Keep them as long as the work goes on. I would like them back to my brother when he is grown. He looked at the books and did not touch them, and the lease. I withdraw the application. Miss Hale, I cannot take that lease from you now. Not this year, not from your hand, not with the whole of Allendale watching, and if you do not understand why then I have wasted 5 weeks. Her voice went, on the last of it, and she took a breath and got it back. You said a true thing in your aunt's morning room, and I have been 3 weeks proving it wrong to myself, and I have not the strength for the 4th week. There is no shame in it. You are what you are, and I am what I am, and there is a fault between us, and the ore is not on my side of it. You will lose the house. Very likely. That is not an answer, that is a shrug in the shape of an answer. What will you do? I will teach arithmetic in a school at Durham, and my brother will go to sea or to a desk, and my grandmother will die in a parish bed within the year and know exactly where she is while she does it, and my sister will be brought up by a woman in Carlisle who is kind and childless. And every one of those things is survivable, and I have costed all 4, and I am not asking you to prevent any of them. I am asking you to let me go out of this room without making it harder. He stood aside from the door. That was the thing she could not forgive him for, all the way home in the cart with the geese and the frost coming down. He had stood aside from the door. The last week of January turned savage. Snow came in off the north on the Tuesday, and lay 2 feet in the lane, and drifted to the tops of the walls, and the valley went quiet in the way it does, and Ninefields was cut off from the road for 3 days. On the 31st of January Dorcas Hale took a fever. It came the way it comes at 79 out of nothing in an afternoon. By the evening she did not know which room she was in, and was talking to Frances's grandfather, who had been dead 19 years, in a perfectly ordinary voice about a horse. Frances sat with her through the night with the last of the candles and cold cloths, and got broth into her at 4 in the morning, and at 6 the fever came up again like a tide. There was no doctor nearer than Allendale, and the lane was full of snow. Toby went out at 7 without telling her. She found the note at 9. It was on the slate, chalked in his small furious hand, and it said that he had gone over the tops to Aldercar, because the road round was 6 miles and the tops were 3, and that he would bring the doctor, or he would bring the Duke, and that he had taken the bird. Frances stood in the kitchen with the slate in her hands, and understood for the first time in 4 years what it was to be genuinely afraid. Not worried, afraid, in the body, in the hands and the mouth. She left Bess with Mrs. Part, who had come up through the drifts on principle at 8, and she went out into it. The tops above Ninefields are not mountains. They are worse in one particular way, which is that they are flat, and a flat white place in a wind has no landmarks in it at all, and a boy of 12, who has walked it 40 times in summer, will find nothing whatever of it in February. She went up by the wall, because the wall was the only honest thing on that hill, keeping her left hand on the stones where they showed and wading where they did not. And the wind came across the top of the fell carrying the snow sideways in long ropes, and she called until her throat was raw and could not hear her own voice past her own collar. She found his tracks at the sheepfold and lost them 100 yards beyond it where the drift had come over, and she stood in the whiteness with the world gone the colour of the inside of an eyelid, and she made herself count to 10, and then she went on, because there was nothing else that a person could do. At 11:15 she heard the bird. It is not a sound anybody could mistake. A jackdaw quarrelling is a small hard flint of a noise, and it carries across weather that will drown a shout, and Solomon was going at it steadily somewhere off to the northwest, on and on, in a fury. She came down a bank into the head of a slack, and there was a wall and a fallen lintel of an old bield, and Toby was inside it curled, with his arms round his knees. And the bird was on the wall above him, and coming up the slack from the other side with his coat white to the shoulder, and a lantern in his hand and 2 men behind him, was the Duke of Wentbridge. They looked at one another across 40 feet of snow, both of them out of breath, neither of them capable of speaking, and the bird went on shouting. Afterwards she learned how it happened. The boy had reached Aldercar at 9:10, having done the 3 miles in 2 hours, and had been given to the housekeeper, and had refused every offer of a bed and a fire, and had stood dripping in the hall demanding a doctor and a horse until somebody fetched the master, and had told the master, in the exact words that the whole household afterwards repeated to one another, that his sister had said there was a fault between them, but that his grandmother was going to die on Thursday, and he did not care about faults. They got Dorcas Hale through it. The Allendale doctor came by the low road with 2 of the Duke's men, breaking the drifts in front of him, and reached Ninefields at 3 in the afternoon, and it was a fever on the lung, and it turned in the small hours of the 2nd of February, and by morning the old woman was awake and cross, and asking why there were strangers in her house. Frances came downstairs at 7 on Candlemas morning, with her hair down her back, and her eyes burnt out of her head, and the kitchen was full of light off the snow, and the sky over the Whitfield road was a hard and perfect blue. Candlemas fair and bright. Winter will have another fight. She stood at the window and laughed until she had to hold the edge of the table. Then she went up and dressed in the grey merino and pinned the garnet cross at her throat, and put the keys of Ninefields in her pocket, and went out to the cart that Mrs. Part's nephew had brought round, to go into Allendale and give her house away at noon. The King's Head at Allendale kept its long room for the Wentbridge audit, and had done since anybody's grandfather. The estate took its rents there at Candlemas and Whitsuntide, and the tenants came in off 11,000 acres and paid, and were given dinner and a great deal of beer afterwards. And the whole valley regarded it as a public occasion, and came whether it had business or not. The room was full when Frances came in. There were 60 men at least, farmers in their good coats, and the estate steward at the head table with the rent books, and Mr. Pattinson the lawyer with his boxes, and Lady Cressida Vane sitting by the fire in black with a footman behind her chair, and the Prideaux party in the window, the mother and the daughter's very tolerable understanding. Josiah Ferring stood at the end of the long table with his hat off and a folded paper in his hand, and the Duke of Wentbridge sat behind the rent books, and he had not slept either, and when she came through the door every head in that room turned, because the whole valley knew what noon was for. Frances walked up the room. It was 30 feet, and it was the longest walk of her life. She put the keys of Ninefields on the table in front of Ferring, and she was going to say something dignified, and had got as far as opening her mouth. Mr. Ferring, the Duke had not raised his voice. He did not need to. Before you take those, Mr. Pattinson has a paper for you. The lawyer stood up and produced it, and Ferring read it, and his face did the thing it had done in the morning room in December, 3 expressions in a second and a half. This is an assignment of the bond. It is. Dated the 29th of January, executed and paid, £427.11 and 4p, and the interest to this day. And you have had your money these 4 days, and you knew perfectly well what was in that paper when you walked in here. And you came anyway, and now everybody has seen you do it. Wentbridge sat back. You may go, or you may stay for the dinner. It is a good dinner. Ferring went. Frances stood in the middle of the long room with 60 men looking at her, and her hands quite steady, and her whole face burning. I told you that I would not be paid for. You are not being paid for. You are being asked for. He got up. Miss Hale, you did me the courtesy in this room's hearing of not pretending you had not heard a thing, and I shall do you the same courtesy now, and it will cost me more than it cost you. In November I said in front of witnesses, 2 of whom are in this room, that no man alive would take you on. Nobody moved. Somewhere at the back a man set down a tankard very carefully. I was wrong in the words, and I was wrong in the whole shape of the thing. There is no man alive fit to take you on. There is no undertaking in it anywhere. There is a woman who has kept a house, and an old woman, and 2 children, and 9 years of another man's work alive on nothing but her own back for 4 winters, and who found the ore that will pay for half of this estate, and who told me to my face that she would rather lose her roof than be salved. And any man who spoke of taking her on was describing his own smallness and calling it charity. He came round the end of the table, so I am not going to offer to take you on. I am going to ask you to take me on. There is a good deal of me. There is a brother in my house who will be there all his life, and I will not have him spoken of as a burden by anybody who lives in it. There is a temper, and a bad way with a fire, and there is that sentence which you will have the right to say back to me for the rest of my life, and which I hope you will use sparingly. He put his hand on the papers Mr. Pattinson had set out, and turned them round on the table so that they faced her. The settlement is drawn. It is drawn in your favour, and it is drawn wide. Ninefields is settled on you absolutely, on you, not on me, and not on any son of mine, and the 11 fields with it. The Sipton lease is granted for 21 years in the name of Frances Hale at a 5th part of the ore, on the terms you asked me for in December, and not 1 shilling better, because you would not have taken 1 shilling better. Your brother goes to school at Durham, and afterwards where he chooses. Your sister has her portion at 1/20. Your grandmother has her own room and her own fire under my roof for as long as she lives, and if she prefers her own roof, then she has that, and a woman to keep it. All of that stands whatever you answer me. Mr. Pattinson has my hand to it already. Adam, it came out of her before she had decided anything at all. Take me on, Frances. She looked at the paper. It swam, and she blinked it clear, and she saw the clerkly hand and the long paragraphs, and she saw her own name written in a document for the first time in her life, as a person who owned something. I have no portion. She looked at him and not at the room. No connection, and a great deal of pride, and I am 28. I am 35, and I have a title, and 11,000 acres, and I have never in my life found the ore under any of it. We are neither of us a bargain. No. Is that a no? It is a no to being a bargain. Frances picked up the pen. Where do I sign? The room came apart. She never afterwards remembered what was shouted, only that a Hetherington from Monk was hammering the table with the flat of his hand, and that Lady Cressida Vane was standing up by the fire with both hands over her mouth, and that somebody at the back began the fiddle far too early. Miss Pattinson, who had seen everything in 40 years and had never seen this, cleared his throat and set out the sand. The Duke signed first, at the foot in a hand as bad as his fire building. Then he reached for his seal ring, which he wore on the little finger of his left hand and had worn there for 11 years, and it was not on his little finger. There was a pause of the kind that could have gone anywhere. Then a boy of 12 came out from under the end of the long table, where he had been since 11:10, with a jackdaw on his shoulder and a small dirty object held up in his fist. He had it off the hall table at Aldercar on Wednesday. Toby aimed this at the entire room. It was under the dairy slate. I ran the whole way. So the 5th Duke of Wentbridge sealed his marriage settlement at Candlemas with a ring recovered from a bird's hoard by his wife's brother, in the long room of the King's Head at Allendale, in front of 60 tenants, at 7 minutes past noon. They were married in the church at Ninebanks in the 2nd week of April, quietly, by Mr. Buick, with the whole valley outside in the road, because the church would not hold it. Dorcas Hale walked the length of the aisle on 2 sticks and refused every arm offered her, and sat in the front pew afterwards receiving compliments like a duchess herself, and lived 4 years more, in her own room at Aldercar with her own fire, and was insufferable to the last week of them. The Sipton level came into ore in the September, west of the fault, 90 feet in, exactly where a dead man's notebook said it would be. Frances went down to the face herself in a borrowed jacket with a candle on her hat, being the lessee, and the men thought it a very great joke for about a fortnight, and then stopped thinking about it at all, which is the only kind of acceptance worth having. Toby went to Durham and hated it, and stayed, and came home at Christmas talking about engines. Bess grew up not remembering any house but Aldercar, and could never be made to understand why the story was thought remarkable. Kit Carrow learned to play without seeing his hands. It took him 2 years, and he was very bad company for the first of them. He kept the bird, or the bird kept him. On fine mornings he sat out on the south wall with his coffee, and Solomon came down off the beeches and walked the length of the stones beside him, and any visitor who felt moved to say something gentle about the sadness of it was generally warned in advance by somebody kinder. There is a proverb about Candlemas that the valley still says, and Frances still corrects it. Bright or clouded, winter comes back regardless. The only question worth anything in her version is what is standing in the house when it does. Thank you for listening to the story all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you're watching from and what the story made you feel. Don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss new stories.